we're just going to get you an update. It's 11:53. Before we go to the news at the top of the hour, an update on a story that we brought you earlier this year. We do like on this programme to stick with stories. We feel it's very important and tell you what's happened, crucially. Andy Neal, a British Army veteran and father of two, has been acquitted by an Abu Dhabi court after being held in prison on drug charges for more than a year. Even though the allegations against him were dropped months ago, he was held in a cell in Dubai before being moved to Abu Dhabi. Mr. Neal, was arrested last October based on a statement from an informer, which was later retracted. His parents, Maurice and Sue, who live in Nottinghamshire, spoke to me in March. Maurice told me what had happened when police arrested him last October.
They then said, right, we're arresting you for drug dealing, and carted him to the police station where he remained in handcuffs for 17 hours. They then wanted him to sign a confession, a document that was written in Arabic, so he couldn't understand it. And because he refused to sign it, they beat him up again, put his finger in a pot of ink and put his thumbprint on it. And when he said, "What have you just made me do?" they said, "You have just signed your confession."
Because he maintains he didn't know what he was signing.
Obviously, he doesn't read Arabic.
OK, and there was no translation provided?
No translation provided whatsoever. So he has been incarcerated ever since, with no evidence against him whatsoever. The guy who said originally it was an Englishman with a red Jeep, has recanted his statement in court to the prosecutor who is in charge of this and said, it's not Andrew.
We don't know him.
I don't know who he is. He says, I don't know why you've arrested him because it's not the man I was buying from.
One of the more frustrating elements of this, of course, and I know the whole thing is extremely frustrating and distressing, is, some people always have that view, there's no smoke without fire.
Well,
have you had to come up against that? And have you
several times. The only thing I can say to people is that Andrew's had blood tests. It has been proved there is no drugs in his system when they arrested him. He's never handled drugs. They didn't find any drugs in his car or in his apartment where his wife and children were. I understand people saying there's no smoke without fire, but I can really and truthfully, hand in heart, say he's never took or used drugs.
Rada Sterling runs Detained in Dubai, the campaign group which has been fighting to get Andy released. Rada, first of all, your reaction to this news?
I mean, we were elated, absolutely, that he's finally been acquitted of the charges. But after 14 months in prison, and especially for a PTSD sufferer, to be in these conditions for so long, including solitary confinement and the most absurd treatment for someone who has been innocent, who was proven innocent in the first place, who the prosecutors knew to be innocent. And this is just something we're seeing constantly. It's not just he was a random victim. We've seen this on numerous occasions, and even recently with another man, Artur Ligęska. He's just come out on exactly the same charges. He was also acquitted, but again, after spending a substantial amount of time in prison.
How is he?
He's going to take a long time to recover, frankly. I mean, 14 months, he was expecting to spend the rest of his life in prison. There's no hope in the UAE. When you're innocent, you would expect to be acquitted much sooner. You would expect not even to be prosecuted. And in the UK, he certainly wouldn't have been. But in the UAE, when you're dealing with a completely foreign system and one that's forced you to sign a confession in Arabic, I mean, it's out of the movies, really, isn't it? It's a nightmare to people, and they really don't know whether they're going to spend the rest of their lives in prison. So that in itself is highly traumatic, and I expect him to return to the UK as soon as possible. But again, he's going to take a while.
Have you been speaking?
No, I haven't been in touch with him directly, but I'm in touch with the family and his wife. And I mean, of course, they're extremely relieved, but just, on the tip of their toes, basically waiting for him to get on that plane and return safely.
Yes, I mean, the contrast, as you say, between the expectation of what you think is going to be your life, and then what happens? I mean, Maurice and Sue were very critical of the Foreign Office when we spoke to them. I mean, what would you say about the role of the government in this particular case?
Yeah, I mean, they took a very hands-off approach, as they do in most cases. They became heavily involved in a couple of other cases, such as Matthew Hedges, but that was possibly because the allegations were related to spying, which also has an impact on the British government. Whereas this one, you know, especially given that he was a veteran of 22 years in the armed forces, received very little support. There was no activism really coming from his FCO, the ambassador, and even though they were heavily lobbied to provide that, none was forthcoming. So, I mean, very disappointing from their point of view.
In terms of people going on holiday then to the United Arab Emirates, what would you say?
Well, it's still highly risky. I mean, we have cases at the moment, and obviously Andy's not the only one in prison on false allegations, whether they're related to drugs or any other allegation. It could be saying something on Twitter or Facebook or having a glass of wine. It could be anything. And if you're raised to the attention of the police, even if you're innocent and the evidence is in your favour, that's not going to help you in the short term anyway, perhaps in a year or two after you've been in detention.
Thank you very much for bringing us up to date with the latest on this. Rada Sterling, who runs Detained in Dubai.